I've been driving a cab for nearly 10 years, and I've seen all sorts of things. Late-night drunks, crying lovers, even the occasional celebrity sneaking around town. But nothing, prepared me for that night. It started like any other shift. The streets were quiet, and the occasional flicker of streetlights cast long shadows over the empty roads. Around 2:30 a.m., as I drove along the old highway just outside the city, I saw her. She was standing at the side of the road, wearing a white sari that shimmered in my headlights. I didn't see her wave me down, but something compelled me to stop. Maybe it was her stillness, the way she stood so unnaturally straight, or maybe it was the faint, pleading look in her eyes. I rolled down the window. "Do you need a ride?" I asked. "Take me to Sundar Lane," she whispered, her voice soft but chilling. I nodded and unlocked the door. She slid into the back seat, her movements fluid and unnervingly quiet. The first thing I noticed was how cold the air became inside the cab. It was the middle of summer, but I found myself reaching to turn off the AC, thinking it might be malfunctioning. It wasn't even on. The drive was tense. I couldn't bring myself to look at her directly, but her reflection in the rearview mirror drew my eyes like a magnet. She was staring out the window, but something was off. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. I cleared my throat. "So, why are you out so late?" She didn't answer. Instead, she slowly turned her head toward me, and for a moment, I thought I saw her smile. But her face was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes, they weren't just dark. They were black, completely void of light. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to focus on the road. The radio crackled suddenly, static filling the cab. I reached to turn it off, but before I could, a voice whispered through the static, "Turn back." I froze. "Did you hear that?" I asked, glancing at her in the mirror. She didn't respond, just kept staring at me, her eyes now fixed on mine through the mirror. The GPS on my phone began to glitch, the screen flickering between maps and static. "Keep driving," she said, her voice low and almost inhuman. When we finally reached Sundar Lane, I felt a wave of relief. I pulled over, but my relief turned to dread when I realized where we were. The street was empty, lined with crumbling buildings and overgrown trees. At the end of the road stood an old cemetery, its rusted gates swinging slightly in the breeze. "Are you sure this is the place?" I asked, my voice shaking. She opened the door and stepped out, her bare feet making no sound on the gravel. "Thank you for bringing me home," she said without looking back. I watched her walk toward the cemetery, disappearing into the fog. My hands were trembling as I reached for the gear shift, ready to drive away as fast as I could. But before I could move, I heard a knock on the back window. I turned, and there she was, inside the cab again, sitting right where she'd been before. But this time, her face was different. Her mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, her black eyes locked onto mine. "Where are you going?" she whispered. I screamed and bolted out of the cab, leaving the engine running. I ran down the road, not stopping until I reached a gas station. The attendant stared at me like I was crazy, but I didn't care. The next morning, my cab was parked neatly outside my house, the doors locked. Inside, the seats were soaked, as if someone had been crying there all night. I quit driving that day. When my grandmother passed away, she left me her old mansion. It was a beautiful, sprawling house with high ceilings, intricate woodwork, and a strange, suffocating silence that seemed to cling to every corner. I'd only been there a few times as a child, but I remembered one thing vividly: the locked room on the second floor. My grandmother had always warned me to stay away from it, saying it was full of memories best left undisturbed. Now that I owned the place, I couldn't ignore my curiosity. The first night, I explored the house, opening creaky doors and sifting through dusty furniture. But when I passed the locked room, I felt a chill. It wasn't just the draft from the old windows, it was something deeper. Something wrong. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard it. A faint sound, like someone whispering just outside my door. I froze, my heart pounding. The whispers grew louder, and then I heard a soft knock. "Who's there?" I called, my voice trembling. The whispers stopped. The next day, I searched the house for the key to the locked room but found nothing. That night, the noises returned, whispers, followed by faint laughter, and then the sound of something dragging across the floor. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a hammer and went upstairs. The lock broke easily, and the door creaked open to reveal a room filled with dolls. Hundreds of them, sitting on shelves, their glassy eyes staring at me. In the center of the room was a large mirror, its surface covered in dust. I stepped closer, wiping it clean. My reflection didn't move. I stared in horror as my reflection tilted its head and smiled. Before I could react, the dolls' heads turned toward me, their eyes glowing faintly. "Stay with us," a voice whispered. The mirror rippled like water, and my reflection reached out, grabbing my wrist. I screamed, trying to pull away, but it was too strong. The last thing I saw before being pulled into the mirror was the dolls, their faces contorted into wicked grins. The next morning, the room was locked again. Inside, there was a new doll on the shelf, a perfect likeness of me, my face frozen in terror.